use prefer and would rather, oh my goodness, like native speakers do in this English lesson. I'm going to show you the difference between would rather and prefer, how to use them, some very specific differences between these two guys, and examples of how to use them in conversations in English. If you don't know me very well, hi, I'm Teacher Prix, and I'm going to help you talk to anyone, anywhere, anytime in English. Welcome aboard. Consider subscribing to the channel because every week I post different kinds of English lessons to help you become a better and more confident English speaker. So I appreciate you being here. Would rather, prefer, would prefer. How do you use them like native speakers do? Let's talk about that. And let's get started with prefer. Prefer is a little bit more formal depending on the context, okay? And it is typically used for general or, very important keyword, habitual preferences. What is habitual? Habit. Something that repeats itself, okay? So, oh, I didn't change the slide. Oh my goodness. But I will create some examples here for you, okay? I prefer to work out in the morning. So that's habitual, okay? I prefer to work out in the morning. That is habitual. It's a preference of mine. I prefer to watch television at night. So it is habitual. I prefer to call my parents on weekends. I am just talking about my preference, and that is very common when using the verb prefer. I am talking about my preferences. Oh, Priscilla, can I use prefer in the past, in the future? You can. Of course you can. I could think of an example, yes. But we need to think about context. We need to think about conversations. When do we usually talk about our preferences? When we are in the present. I prefer to study English in English. How about you? Do you prefer to study English in your native language, or do you prefer to study English in English? I hope the answer is English. You prefer to study English in English. So that is the first definition you need to know about the verb prefer. Now, one mistake that I see students make is to use, especially when you're giving choices, one over the other, is to use the wrong preposition. One important observation, using the wrong preposition, the wrong word here, will not confuse the listener. So if you're talking to a native speaker and instead of using the proper preposition, you use a different one, they may understand, especially if you use this one. It's very common for English learners, for English at an intermediate, English students at an intermediate level, pre-intermediate, even advanced, to say then instead of to. As the example here on the screen, I prefer tennis than soccer. I prefer to walk than to run. Okay, now there are two mistakes here, double mistakes, okay? So you can say then soccer. I prefer tennis than soccer. People will understand, but is it correct? No, I'm afraid it's not. So don't do that. Now, what should you do instead? You should use the preposition to. I prefer tennis to soccer. So I prefer tennis to soccer. This is actually true. Which one do you prefer? Tennis or soccer? I prefer tennis, okay? So you see, it is habitual. It's something that is like ordinary for you. It's typical for you. Okay, not ordinary, but typical, habitual. I prefer tennis to soccer. That's my thing. I play tennis. Do I play tennis well? I am a learner. I'm excited about my skills. I'm on the journey to tennis mastery, hopefully. So I prefer to walk than to run. There are two mistakes here. I prefer tennis to soccer. That's appropriate, okay? I prefer walking to running. That would be better. When I am using verbs, pay attention. When I'm using verbs to show options that I prefer, I like this, not this, I prefer this instead of this, then it is better to use the verb of the action in the ing form. I prefer dancing to walking. I prefer walking to running. I prefer speaking in English to speaking in my language. I prefer studying English in English to studying English in my language. So you see, if I am using a verb, an action, a verb to describe my preference, I prefer plus the verb in ing. I prefer dancing to studying. Is that you? I hope not. You should be studying. So that's the gist. Now, prefer plus rather than. That's when we get some variations here. I can use prefer plus rather than. Then it is possible. Only then? No. Rather than? Yes. Because rather than in this situation is the same as instead of. Okay? I prefer walking instead of running. Then it's fine. I prefer tennis to soccer. I prefer walking to tennis, to running. I can say rather. However, there's a difference. That's why I am showing you both. In the previous slide, I showed you the preposition to. But now here, if you want to sound more natural, if you want to sound more conversational when using rather than, then you will need to make some changes to your sentence. So look at the original. I prefer tennis to soccer. Fine, it's not a verb. I prefer tennis to soccer. Look at my changes here. I prefer to play tennis rather than soccer. Now it's interesting. It is not common to use only nouns. I prefer soccer rather than tennis. In the first part, at least in the first part, I need the verb, okay? I need the action, play tennis. Oh, Priscilla, why didn't you say play soccer? Because then it's repeating the play, so it's not necessary. But if it's the different verb, then I need, okay? I prefer to play tennis rather than study English. Then you need, okay? Then you would need a verb. But if it's the same verb, then you don't need to repeat the same verb in this situation. But look, I prefer to play tennis, not I prefer tennis rather than soccer. Then it's not a good idea. Then you need to make this small change. Now, would a native speaker understand? They would, okay? It's just that it doesn't sound as natural. So I would make this change, okay? And here, I prefer to walk rather than dance. You don't need to you don't need to use the preposition to. I prefer to walk rather than to dance. No, it's not necessary. You don't need to do that, okay? So keep that in mind. So far, you learned that I use prefer typically in the present. I'm talking about habitual actions that I want to do instead. Then I showed you some mistakes. I showed you that you need to use the preposition to when you're talking about your favorite option. I prefer dancing to walking, okay? Then I showed you that you can also use rather than, then it's possible, but you will need to make some small changes to your sentence. Now let's move on and talk about I prefer not to. Priscilla, if I use prefer in the negative form, can I just say I don't prefer? Not a good idea, okay? And there is a proper way to say that in English. When you're talking about your preferences, and when you say you want to avoid something, that something is not your preference, it is better to say I prefer not to. So you use affirmative. I prefer not to. But this is really specific. It's a very specific situation. You can talk about habitual things, but you need contextualization. So look at the two examples that I have here. Imagine a conversation. I'm talking to a friend, and then I say, hey, how was your conversation with Alex? How did it go? You could say, I prefer not to talk about it. You cannot say, I don't prefer to talk about it. Because it's right now, I prefer not to. It's not a good idea. I would like to talk about something else. I prefer not to talk about this conversation I had with Alex. So it's not I don't prefer will not sound natural in this situation, okay? Another example, now it's habitual. I love meat, but I prefer not to eat meat at night because it upsets my stomach. So I typically have a salad. So let's say I'm talking about my eating habits with my nutritionist. And then she says, hey, do you like meat? Do you eat meat? Yeah, sure. But I prefer not to eat meat at night because it upsets my stomach. So I typically have a salad at night. But I love meat though. It's really good. It's healthy. I love a steak, with some fries. Mwah, amazing. So here I am talking about something habitual. I prefer not to eat meat at night. It's a preference. I prefer not to do this at night because it upsets my stomach. It's not a good idea for me. So do you understand? And thinking about I don't prefer, it is possible, but it's so specific, okay? It's not a good idea, okay? For example, you look at me and you say, "Oh, I don't prefer coffee." It's not common. You will not typically hear native speakers say, "Oh, I don't prefer coffee. I prefer tea." No, I prefer tea. So go straight to I prefer. If you're talking about something you don't like, you don't prefer, just talk about what you actually prefer. I prefer tea. I prefer coffee. I prefer milkshake. Milkshake's not as good for you, okay? So you can say, I prefer tea. I don't really like coffee. Do you like coffee? Oh, I don't prefer coffee. No, it doesn't make sense. So when you see I don't prefer, you will see that in really specific, rather formal situations. So it's when you're talking about your preferences at the end of the day, talk about what you prefer. Not about what you don't prefer, unless it is really specific, like I showed you in the previous slide, okay? Moving on. Would you prefer? Priscilla, I've seen questions with do you prefer? Do you prefer soccer or tennis? Which do you prefer, soccer or tennis? Huh? Which do you prefer? Options, right? And I can do that. But when I use would you prefer, I am really being more polite, okay? So I'm asking something polite, I'm making a polite request, I am talking about hypothetical preferences. So it is possible to use would you prefer. Look, are you coming to the cocktail party? I forgot party, okay? Are you coming to the cocktail party after the conference? I would prefer to stay at the hotel tonight. I have an early meeting in the morning. I have an early meeting to attend. So the next day, I can infer it's the next day. So when I use I prefer, it is more general preference. I prefer to work from home. Look, which do you prefer? Working from home or working at the office? You tell me. So it's more general. When I use would prefer, it is polite request or a polite preference at the moment or something specific, a current or specific situation. Oh, it's so cold. I would prefer to work from home today. It's today, okay? And a little bit more polite. So with the conversation I showed you, maybe my manager is asking me, so Priscilla, are you coming to the cocktail party after the conference? Listen, I would love to, but I would prefer to stay at a hotel tonight. I have an early meeting to attend tomorrow, so I think it's best if I stayed at the hotel. That's it. Very polite, very chic, very fancy. You do that. So you can say would prefer. But if you're talking about your general preferences, stick with prefer. I prefer. It's much more common, it's easier. Go for it. And if you want to support the channel, I invite you to subscribe. Why not? And if you're finding value in this lesson, I have many other lessons and I know you can help someone by sharing this video with a friend. And if you're interested, I have my study plan. I have many other courses and programs and ebooks that I know will help you on the journey to fluency. But let's get cracking, let's keep going. Would rather. Now, if prefer is used to talk about general preferences, in general, habitual preferences. Would rather, on the other hand, will imply A specific preference, a particular situation. And it's a little bit more informal, more casual than prefer. So the structure is the subject, would rather, and if you need a verb, and it's commonly used with verbs, okay? I would rather plus the verb. It's not typically, let me correct that sentence. You use it with verbs, okay? You don't use it with nouns. You use that with actions. But here, when you use the verb next to would rather, there's no preposition to. It's just the base form of the verb without the preposition to. What is that supposed to mean? I will use would rather plus the verb. No to, nothing. I would rather study. I would rather drink. I would rather dance. I would rather drink coffee. I would rather have lunch. I would rather sleep. I would rather go. That's it. And look at the example. Hey, how about we go bowling tonight? Nah, I'm feeling tired. I would rather stay home tonight. I would rather stay home tonight. Priscilla, can I say I prefer to stay home tonight? No. No. Okay? Because remember, prefer is habitual. And here it's a specific, it's tonight. I would rather stay home tonight. Could you say, I would prefer, I would prefer to stay home tonight? Then it's possible. But remember, if I use would prefer, it's a little bit more formal. It's I would rather use would rather because it is more informal, okay? So I would prefer to stay home tonight. I would recommend using I would rather stay home tonight. So you see, hey, how about we go bowling? How about we go dancing tonight? Sorry, I'm tired. I would rather stay home tonight. I would like to stay home tonight. That's the idea. Moving on. Don't say, as I mentioned before, I would rather to stay home. There's no preposition to, okay? So that's it. And it's not common with nouns. Don't use nouns. Actually, if I have to fix this, don't use it with nouns. I would rather stay home tonight. I would rather play soccer than tennis. And here, just to show you, I would rather play soccer than tennis. I am not using the verb play because I already mentioned play soccer. So the repetition is not necessary. But if it's another action, then you have to say. So you see, that's the point I want to make. But after rather, I need the verb. I need the action. There's no room for just a noun, okay? I need to use the verb. I prefer soccer to tennis is fine. But I can't say I would rather tennis than soccer. It doesn't make sense. I would rather play tennis, then it's fine. Than soccer, then it's fine because I know the verb play was mentioned previously. Therefore, it's okay if I don't use the verb again after then. Then it would be fine, all right? I would rather not. I would rather not. Priscilla, yes, it's possible. If using would rather, if you're using would rather in the negative form, you're not going to change to wouldn't. No, because we learned that when we're using would, we say wouldn't, but not here. I would rather not, okay? That's the proper way to say it. So you add not after rather. I would rather not. And here's the same thing for specific situations. Hey, how's Jane? What did she tell you? Maybe I'm in a conversation and my friend knows I talked to Jane. Now he wants to know, Priscilla, did you talk to Jane? So what happened? Tell me. I know you want to know, but I would rather not talk about her right now. It's a very delicate situation. She told me some really serious stuff, so I would rather not talk about the conversation. Sorry. But maybe some other time. So here it's a specific situation that I prefer not to talk about it. Okay? That's the idea. And finally, a very interesting situation with would rather is would rather plus past. I can do that. I will show you how to do it. Pay attention to this slide here on the screen. I can use would rather, but I cannot do this with would prefer to. Only would rather, okay? Only. It's the only possible way. I can use would rather followed by a past, following, a past tense when I want to involve some other people in the action, even if it's present or future, okay? I'll show you a situation. Alex, can you talk to Susie? So I'm asking Alex, can you, Alex, talk to Susie? Andrew, no. Alexander, no, let's see, another name. Linda, I'd rather you, Linda, talked to Susie. You know her better than I do. That's great. So when I am talking about something that involves other people, even if it's present or future, I can use the past. Would rather plus past. So I would rather you talk to her because you know her better than I do. It's better, why don't you talk to, in more informal, why don't you talk to her? You know her better than I do. So I think it would be better if you talk to her instead of me because you're friends with her. I'm not friends with her. So I would rather you, Susie, Linda, talked to Susie. That's very common. Another example here. Andrew, should I send the files to the team now? So look at the team that they're talking. Andrew is talking to Linda again. Now it's not Alex, Andrew. Andrew, should I send the files to the team? So Linda wants to know, Andrew, hey, I got the file. Should I send to the team? I'd rather you didn't. Okay, so I'd rather you did not. I didn't finish the sentence. It's not necessary. I'd rather you didn't finish. You didn't send the files. Okay, let me check them one more time. Baby, baby, one more time. So that is a very common use of would rather in English plus the past. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Share it with a friend, but I gotta go. See you later, alligator.